A lot of this is from experience where I work near Mildura at Deadens, but I think it's appropriate for other areas as well. You've heard today about knowing your soil, and when selecting a rootstock to plant, you should really understand your soil, what conditions you're going to put the rootstock into, and what the limitations of those stocks are and the compatibilities. Limitations like, are they sensitive to salt or lime? Here in the Riverina's majority would be tri and sit ranges. They have different characteristics as well, and you really need to understand your soil to see which is best to put in. And some of the stocks perform differently with what they impart to the fruit. Tri is probably, from what I grow a range of rootstocks, varieties on top of those, and Tri probably gives the best fruit quality for elevated sugar and acid, which means flavour. So Tri is probably the pick of the stocks for me for giving fruit quality. Some of these problems with compatibility of rootstocks can be very specific to just some varieties, and I'll mention some of those shortly. And the symptoms of incompatibility are fairly obvious, and you can pick up problems even if you're holding a tree in the nursery. I've often seen symptoms starting on trees quite early. Normally 8 to 12 you're pretty sure there's going to be a problem. Sometimes things fall over a bit earlier than that, and sometimes they're much, much later with delayed incompatibility. You've probably all seen that. The rootstock wants to grow and spit the sign out the top, so there's a lot of suckering. The rootstock wanting to take off, and you're always continually ripping off suckers. You don't necessarily need to have overgrowth of the rootstock swallowing the scion. You can just have it's almost like a ridge or a ring, and those trees are quite old, but they're not very productive. There is a problem along that union line there. One of the main problems we found a number of years ago when Navelina's were released, that it didn't like swingle rootstock. And there was quite strong promotion of swingle coming out of South Australia to put navels on because they grew very well with no young trees, but on swingle there was trees dying at a very young age. And one of the symptoms of picking up that type of incompatibility is there's almost like a groove around the union. It can be a yellow ring in there, and also a little bit of gumming. So tearing out a bark strip can give you a good idea if there's incompatibility. These trees were probably 6-year-old Navelina's actually dying, and that problem started in a whole range of areas very quickly. That's another Navelina selection. It's called Italian Navelina. It's an early maturing Navelina. It never went commercial. We put a hectare in just on spec at the station, and a few years after putting them in, we found the little ring starting, and a few trees died, but then it just stabilised and sat for year after year. We were getting a reasonable crop off them. They didn't grow very well, the trees, but they didn't all die, which I thought had happened. But they've been pulled out anyway because Mildura Fruit Company said that's the end of taking that variety because there's a better quality variety called M7 available now, so they're gone, ready to be replanted. But it wasn't a death sentence having that type of incompatibility on that particular variety. And with some varieties you can pick up this problem many, many years down the track. That's a variety called Amigo Mandarin, which wouldn't be grown in this area. It's mostly in South Australia. Year 18 they started to fall over on some of the properties. So it took that long for this overgrowth to start choke the variety. So probably the message from this is do a bit of homework right at the start before making investment in a rootstock scion combination. The information's out there. With some of the new varieties it's probably not, but with a lot of the standard stuff it's quite, there is information available. Daisy Mandarin, which some has been grown in this area. That's a shot from Western Australia, probably the best navel Daisy Mandarin block I'd ever seen. Very big crops, regular big crops, the trees under a lot of stress, and eventually incompatibility started to show up with trees declining, overgrowth starting, and this runs through the 11, 12, year 14, 2014, and that's close to being pulled out, that block, whereas some other patches I've seen, incompatibility doesn't seem to show up, but I think it's a reaction to crop stress, there is a block in Mildura falling over as well. It's a combination of lots and lots of big crops and some frost damage brought on the incompatibility. And as we talked earlier, there's a variety out of the Chinese rootstock program which went up to Queensland, and lo and behold, it looked like a very, very good union with Imperial Mandarin, which is often one of the big problems, having Imperial on a tri or any tri hybrid. It just doesn't, eventually dies out. Because Troy Citrange on the right there is a tri hybrid. It's a cross between trifoliate orange and a sweet orange, creates Citrange rootstocks. And they named this variety just quite recently Barclay, after Pat Barclay, a former pathologist in New South Wales DPI. That'll be available in a few years' time through Citrus. They've just received the budwood to grow seed trees. So that now there'll be another outcome from that program, which might have taken 19 years, but with rootstocks it's a very long-term process to find new ones and be confident enough to make recommendations. We didn't pick up that variety, was a real winner of Dad, and the Queenslanders picked it up in their climate. It was just middle of the pack, and Queensland's performed very well. So different areas, often rootstocks perform differently as well. I've been sort of putting down some stocks a bit. Swingle is a bit of a dud, whereas in Spain, I saw that block in when it was 12-year-old. I saw it again this year when it was 19. They're all in Furas on Swingle rootstock, doing just fine. Very productive. No sign of any problems along the union. And different climates, different environments, different soils. Swingle's a stock used quite widely overseas, especially in wet soils. It survived flooding in some of the Spanish work, and it's going quite well here. Whereas in Australia, it's one with a big question mark on it for a range of signs. That's just Tang Gold is really Tango. If you're going to market the Tango variety in Australia now, it has to be called Tang Gold because the trademark's taken for Tango. So any time now we talk about a Fura, the seedless Fura, the Tango, it's a Tang Gold. That's why it's on the heading there. This is just a trial stock from the China program. It's down here. I put Tang Gold on it a few years ago and put in a trial, and I thought, oh God, it's outgrowing the rootstock. When you have overgrowth, that's another sign that there's a problem. If the sign starts to swallow the rootstock, but a few years later, they're starting to even up in growth rate, so it may be okay. I don't think it's a winner, but it was just interesting to see in time this growth rates are evening up on both those stocks, all that stock and the sign. One of the big hassles with compatibility is Eureka lemon, and a lot of lemons have been planted all around Australia, a lot of seedless lemons, and this is a Eureka seedless in Western Australia in a soil type which is basically beach sand, or even worse than beach sand, it's silica white sand. And the one on the Cox rootstock, which is one coming out of the Ag Department, New South Wales DPI bred that one, is outperforming the Benton Citrange, which is one was also bred by our department for being compatible with Eureka. And people are now using Cox because the Benton seed supply is really not, it's taken up very quickly. It's a difficult rootstock tree because it doesn't produce a lot of seed, and Cox has also been bred for the purpose of matching with Eureka. And the Danton, some of the Danton trees, their union's fine, they're quite productive. I've had trees growing for a number of years, everything seems fine. There's a lot of research results behind Cox being compatible with Eureka. Other ways around this problem with Eureka is to put an interstock. This interstock here between whatever, that's probably a Citrange, Troy Citrange, then Clymenia, which is it's a species, citrus species, and then the Eureka on top, that's out of Queensland. And at Danton, 20 years ago, we put in a trial looking for if we could grow Imperials on Troy Citrange. We did one row as an interstock, put a Valencia interstock in between. That row's still there, the rest have started to die at about years 6 to 8. that row still exists. So having that interstock, the sweet orange between the two, has been a success. And some of the nurseries now are offering this. If you want to buy a tree with an interstock, they'll double bud it. Double budding means the first bud that goes on is a Valencia, or some are using Celestiana. And then when that takes, you quickly rub out the bud, and then you bud on the variety you want onto that slither of Valencia or Celestiana. And then that tree is sold as an interstock double budded tree. More expensive. There's some insurance now between the actual rootstock and the variety if there could be problems. Time will tell if that's successful, but it's certainly being offered from 2 nurseries I know. So that's all talking about here's your stock, and let's bang it in. If you've already got a block you want to change over, there are sort of options, and you can rework, or we've been reworking for 20 years at the station, and I first saw reworking by the original Israeli guy who came out in 1990. Did the property next door and sat and watched, and it kind of worked. There was some problems with sunburn damage and having trees exposed too long after they cut down, but the block's still there. Top worked as a stump in 1990. So when you're looking at top working, I've sort of found that the rootstock really is the dominant effect. It'll go through the interstock up into the sign, and I was sort of worried that having an interstock would change the sort of quality of the fruit, or make it all the same. If you had a Citrange, a Tri, or a Cleopatra rootstock, and you had a Valencia interstock, all the fruit on top would be the same. There wouldn't be any effect, but really the rootstock still dominates, especially with a Valencia in between or a navel. Herbicides is a big issue. This is a shot from locally where there's some residual herbicide stayed in the ground. And because it's a stump graft, there's not much way to dilute that herbicide when it gets into the actual rootstock, or gets into the stock and it gets into the sign. So I don't know whether they've recovered, Andrew.
Yeah, they've got away now.
They've recovered, but there's also an issue, even if it's too quickly reworked after you've used residual herbicides. There's also a problem with blowing if you're surrounded by broadacre farmers. There has been some issues with volatilization of herbicides and wind carrying it in and affecting the young growth. Tree age, if you top work a 40-year-old tree, it's still going to be 40-year-old. Ideally, if you're going to top work and change to another variety, do it on younger trees. And don't do it on trees which are a bit ill. Healthier the better. And the source of your graft material, if you can get something as close as possible to wood that comes out of Oz Citrus scheme. I'm always handling wood that's gone quarantine to Elizabeth MacArthur Ag Institute to Oz Citrus to me, and it's pretty much, it's 100% clean of known pathogens. So I've really had no real trouble at all in the top working we do it, because I'm using very healthy material on quite healthy trees. A big one, sunburn. If you're doing a stump graft, it's just like having a fence post in the ground if it's really hot, so it's going to heat right up. I tend to favour leaving a nurse limb so it keeps pumping the water through the tree and keeping that tree cooler while you're establishing a new graft. Stump grafting, you've got to be right on top of your game. You just don't leave trees sitting there for a while after you've cut them back unpainted, or they'll start to burn very quickly. And aftercare, with one of the other major problems I've seen is they start to move inside a plastic bag under the paper bag, and they're left there too long, so they'll start to rot. Usually about 20 days from doing your graft, your bark graft, and putting a bag over it, they'll start to move, and that's when you should be looking to work out when you should let some air in and gradually adjust that graft to the outside environment. And graft management, I'm meaning these things will grow like mad. Some of the varieties just take off, and unless they've got a good grasp on the stock that they're being top worked onto, they'll tear off. And I've seen some places where the grafts, see they're growing really well, and then suddenly a big windstorm and you're ripping half of them off. So pruning and management of that vigour is very important, and de-suckling as well, because there'll be a lot of regrowth coming out of especially the scion and sometimes the stock when you're, or the interstock when you're grafted. And just don't let that take over the tree. You want all the energy going into that top growth rather than the suckers. And when to take off the nurse limb, I tend to take it off between 1.5 and 2 years. Some people take it off much earlier, but until that graft area is well established, I tend to leave it on. And costs, I won't talk about costs, but Mr. Falavine, the economist, he's done budgets on comparing replanting versus reworking, and that's available through our department. I've just put a few pictures of stuff we do, because I tend to top work all the new varieties, because we can get through quickly and get an idea how they perform. So, and we're always reworking onto Valencia, and I've probably reworked about 100 different varieties over the years, and never had a problem with going on to Valencia, or a sweet orange. The same at Stand for Navel as well. So 6 months, but they've been topped as well, so they've not gone right up here. 18 months, they're really starting to grab it. The nurse limb's still on there, and that's a matter of just cleaning out any growth in there to keep that in full sun, that area. Don't let the nurse limb overgrow. In 2 years, you've got a little tree, the nurse limb gone. Year 3, that's when we're looking to have some fruit to test. And year 4, almost considered back into a commercial production stage. Some varieties, things happen much quicker than that. This is Nardicot, which is another seedless Aphora. This one's out of South Africa. And ARC means Ag Research Centre. Andrew's been there. And it happened very quickly. 2014, we got the wood, did it, a little row of bark grafts. 2015, very good growth, and fruit last year, and quite a good crop this year. So Aphora performs a little differently. It tends to come into production very quickly, or Aphora types. And regrafting, you can use a tree a number of times. We've regrafted some trees 3 times. And one of the other ways of probably getting back into a tree which has already been regrafted is you can restart it by chopping half the tree off. That'd be one of the varieties we've used previously. And then stimulating these Valencia suckers and then grafting into those suckers. We're using a wrapped stick, putting a parafilm around the stick and letting that be, no bags or anything, just doing that quite early before it gets too hot. Buddy tape wrapped sticks, it's sort of works for us. Doesn't take much for them to take off. 4 weeks they're pushing through. 6 weeks they're really kicking off. We did these a little late in the season, so we put a bit of a cover around, a bit of paper cover just to protect them a bit. And then 15 weeks they've grabbed onto that small Valencia regrowth. You can chip bud into regrowth as well. They're all chip buds done into Valencia regrowth. This is a large patch bud. The Spanish use that 100% when they're reworking trees. They also do a cut above the patch bud to stir or stimulate that to grow. And on this tree it's all methods: bagged, wrapped bud and budded as well. Put this up, I tagged along with the Mildura Fruit Company when they went to Spain this year, and that's the Spanish are reworking their pale neighbours to this Ori variety. They have a ready market in Europe, and John Chavarria up here with Javier, the owner, it's under net because I think there's going to be a lot of value in this fruit. He's going like that, which means he wants his regrafted trees to be flat, and they're tying them down as well as young grafts. This variety has a very strong upright habit. Upright habit, lots of growth, no fruit. So the idea is to take the vigour out, get them horizontal as quick as you can, and let fruit pull the limbs down and prune them so they're a flat, not a completely upright variety. And similar sort of story in Israel. They have their most profitable variety into Europe. So the Spanish are investing very big in that variety. We're having play with it too. Severe pruning, Bill, if you're still here. A lot of regrowth, rubbing the regrowth off. Some very heavy gloves have become available. They're desuckering gloves, they're almost like bitumen on them. So you're rubbing off the regrowth, and we'll just see how we go. We've tied a few limbs down as well. We've had a lot of issues trying to grow Ori, because beating the vigor is half the problem. And just as a final slide, also in Spain, they're doing that. We came to this property and said, gee, who's your pruner? This bloke said, there they are there. He bends. They bend so they get an audible crack on these very upright varieties, and that's the 24 hectares bent over to try and get them into a more horizontal, fruitful position. I came back and tried that, and what I didn't break off is still down. I heard the crack, but the crack came along with breaking the limb. That's in our autumn, but that's probably now you'd be doing when the sap starts to flow.
Thank you, Graeme.